Hello my beloved friends, and welcome back to the Untold Stories. Now I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be a crazy idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the case. Right, let's get comfy and relax, and let's begin by Story 1: The Shadow of Nyx by Yvonka, Oregon. Willow Creek was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and nothing exciting ever happened. It was quiet, peaceful, and predictable until it wasn't. I lived in a small, weathered farmhouse on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. My only companion was my cat, Nyx. She was a sleek black cat with piercing yellow eyes that seemed to see right through you. I named her Nyx after the Greek goddess of the night because she had this uncanny ability to vanish into the shadows, only to reappear when you least expected it. Nyx was my everything. She'd curl up in my lap while I read, chase after fireflies in the backyard, and even sit on the porch with me as I watched the sun set over the hills. But everything changed on November 5th, 2023. That was the day Nyx disappeared for the first time. It was a Sunday evening, around 8:45 p.m. I had just finished grading papers. I teach English at the local high school when I realized Nyx wasn't in her usual spot on the couch. I called her name, but she didn't come. I searched the house, the barn, even the edge of the woods, but there was no sign of her. I told myself she'd come back. She always did. But as the hours turned into days, I started to feel this gnawing dread in the pit of my stomach. By the second night, I couldn't sleep. Strange noises echoed outside, soft scratching at the windows, faint meows that sounded distorted, almost human. The wind howled like a mournful spirit through the trees, and shadows danced menacingly against my walls. The air felt heavier each night as the silence in the house became oppressive. I started noticing things I hadn't before, like the subtle but unmistakable scent of decay that seemed to cling to the air around me, especially at night. It wasn't the smell of mildew or anything natural, it was something worse, like rotting flesh. Then, on November 7th, at exactly 2:03 a.m., I woke up to a persistent tapping on my bedroom window. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, straining to see through the darkness. There, on the windowsill, was Nyx. But something was wrong. Her fur was matted and streaked with something dark. Mud? No, deep down, I knew it wasn't mud. It was blood. Her eyes, they glowed unnaturally bright in the dim light, like two tiny lanterns piercing through a foggy night. I opened the window cautiously. She jumped inside, but didn't come to me like she usually did. Instead, she sat there staring at me with an unsettling intensity. Nyx? I whispered hesitantly. She hissed, a sound so sharp and guttural it didn't even sound like a cat, and darted under the bed. My heart sank. This wasn't my Nyx anymore. The next morning, when the first rays of dawn filtered through the windows, I found Nyx back on the couch, looking pristine, her fur soft and glossy. She was purring as though nothing had happened. But I knew something was terribly wrong. Over the next few days, I kept seeing things out of the corner of my shadowy figures moving in the periphery, the sense of something lurking just behind me, watching. Nyx would vanish for hours, only to reappear in strange places, inside cabinets or perched atop shelves. But it wasn't her behavior that disturbed me so much anymore. It was the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something else was in the house with me. On November 13th, everything spiraled out of control. In the dead of night, scratching erupted from within my walls, a frantic clawing that made my skin crawl. Grabbing my flashlight, I followed the noise to the kitchen, where Nyx stood in a corner clawing at the wood paneling with an unsettling fervor. Her tiny paws left deep gouges as if she were trying to escape something unseen. Nyx! Stop! I shouted in desperation. But she ignored me, continuing her frantic scratching until her paws bled crimson against the splintered wood. When I rushed towards her to intervene, she turned abruptly. Her eyes were now completely black voids, devoid of any warmth or familiarity. Her mouth stretched wider than any cat's should have been, revealing rows of needle-like teeth glistening in the dim light as she let out an unearthly growl that reverberated through my bones. I barely managed to dodge her as she lunged at me with terrifying speed and agility that defied all logic for a creature so small. My heart pounded wildly in my chest, and I bolted into the bathroom, locking myself inside as the house trembled with the force of her relentless claws scraping at the doorframe. Hours passed before I dared to open the bathroom door, and when I did, the house was eerily still. The air was thick with the scent of something burning. The walls were streaked with deep, jagged scratches, and the floorboards were covered with symbols, scrawled in blood, symbols I recognized as ancient protective wards from a dark ritual. My stomach churned as I realized that whatever had returned that night wasn't just Nyx, it was something far worse. Desperate for answers, I turned to the town's history, digging through old records and dusty books in the library. I learned that Willow Creek had once been home to a cult, a group of people who believed in appeasing dark forces that inhabited the woods surrounding the town. They performed rituals, sacrifices, and blood magic to keep the creatures at bay, but it seemed that something had been awakened again. As the days passed, strange things began happening in the house. My lights flickered and dimmed, objects would move on their own, and at night, whispers filled the air, soft and unintelligible but unmistakably human. One night, I woke up to find the entire house plunged into darkness, with Nyx, her black eyes now glowing, sitting at the foot of my bed, watching me silently. But she was no longer my cat. This thing, the creature, had replaced her. It was feeding on my fear, growing stronger each day. The feeling of dread that had lingered in my stomach was now a permanent presence, gnawing away at me. Then, on the night of November 22nd, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the scratching outside my door reached a fever pitch. I couldn't take it anymore. I left the house and ventured into the woods, driven by the sickening thought that Nyx, or whatever had taken her place, was calling me. The forest was alive with the sound of the wind whispering through the trees, but there was something else now, something darker. As I walked deeper, I saw her, Nyx, sitting at the edge of the clearing. But when I got closer, I saw what she had become. Her body was twisted, her fur matted with blood, and her eyes, those bright, piercing yellow eyes, were full of malice. "I've been waiting," she said in a voice that was no longer hers. It was the voice of something ancient, something far older than humanity. "You can never leave Willow Creek." I turned to run, but the ground beneath me cracked open, and I was swallowed whole by the earth. Now, I am the one who waits. The creature that replaced Nyx has become my companion. The scratching, the whispers, they will never stop. And soon, someone else will hear it. A new victim, just like I once was. They will find me, waiting in the shadows with the glowing eyes. And they will join me, bound to the woods of Willow Creek forever. Let's jump to the next story, which more horrific and will make you question yourself if you want to adopt a cat again. We titled it The Whispers of Evil by Clara. My name is Clara, and I'm from Hollow's End, Maine. Hollow's End is one of those forgotten towns that never make it into maps. It's tucked deep within the woods, perpetually shrouded in fog. The nights are so quiet, so still, you can hear your own heartbeat. It's the kind of place where things go unnoticed, forgotten by everyone except the ones unlucky enough to be trapped here. I came to Hollow's End 2 years ago after inheriting my grandmother's old house, a creaky, 2-story Victorian with peeling paint and a history that no one seemed willing to talk about. The house came with a cat, Marmalade, an old orange tabby with fur like a pile of autumn leaves and eyes that had a strange glint to them. My grandmother had loved him, and though I wasn't much of a cat person, I couldn't bring myself to abandon him. Marmalade was different. He had a strange habit of staring at nothing for hours, his tail twitching as though he were watching something invisible. Sometimes he would disappear for days at a time, only to show up at the back door as if nothing had happened. I thought it was odd, but I brushed it off as eccentricities of an old cat. That was until the night of October 30th, 2023. It started innocuously enough, with the scratching. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes after dinner when I first heard it, a faint, rhythmic scratching beneath the floorboards. At first, I thought it was Marmalade, but when I called his name, he didn't come. The scratching grew louder, more persistent. It wasn't just a sound, it was deliberate, almost as if something beneath the house was trying to claw its way up. I knelt down and pressed my ear to the floor. That's when I heard it, a low, whispering voice, barely audible, but unmistakably there. I thought it was my imagination. I convinced myself it was the house settling, or perhaps rodents in the walls. But the scratching didn't stop, and neither did the whispers. The next day, Marmalade was missing. Again. He'd done this before, disappearing for hours or days, but this time something felt different. I spent the day searching for him, walking through the woods behind the house and calling his name. But it wasn't until after dark, when I was returning to the house, that I heard him. His meows, faint but unmistakable, seemed to come from beneath the earth. I froze. I followed the sounds to the basement and found Marmalade sitting at the foot of the stairs, his fur disheveled and his eyes wide, too wide. They were not the warm amber I had grown accustomed to. They were cold, almost silver, with an eerie, unnatural gleam. I called to him, but he didn't move. He just stared, and for a moment, I swear his pupils flickered and stretched like black ink spilling across a page. It was as if he were no longer entirely Marmalade. I reached out to him, and as my fingers brushed his fur, something strange happened. A cold, clammy chill ran through my arm, and a sharp, tingling sensation spread up my spine. The cat flinched, but not like any cat I'd ever seen. It was as though he was trying to fight something inside of him. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the feeling passed. Marmalade blinked, and when he looked up at me, it was as if nothing had happened. His eyes had returned to normal. But I knew something had changed. Over the next few days, Marmalade's behavior grew increasingly bizarre. He no longer slept in his usual spots. He'd sit by the door, staring into the dark, flicking his tail as though watching something I couldn't see. He would wander the house at odd hours, his paws making strange, hollow sounds against the floorboards, as though the weight of his steps no longer touched the earth. Then the nightmares started. I dreamt that Marmalade was not a cat at all. In the dreams, he was standing at the edge of the woods, eyes glowing like twin lanterns, his fur matted and slick. Behind him, the trees swayed, whispering something I couldn't understand. When I tried to call out to him, the words wouldn't come, as though my throat was being constricted. And then, in a burst of light, his form would shift, twisting, elongating, into something monstrous. Something ancient. With too many limbs. Too many eyes. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, the lingering feeling of his gaze burning into me. On November 5th, things took a darker turn. I was cleaning the basement when I found it, a small, weathered book hidden beneath an old wooden crate. The cover was faded, but the spine was marked with strange symbols I didn't recognize. My curiosity got the better of me, and I flipped it open. The pages were filled with faded ink, written in a language that seemed to squirm before my eyes. But I could make out enough to realize what I was reading, a spell. A curse. The more I read, the more my heart began to race. The book detailed the rituals performed by the ancient cult that had once lived in Hollow's End, the same cult that had vanished centuries ago, leaving only whispers behind. The cult worshipped a dark entity that thrived on fear and manipulation, and they used animals, especially cats, to channel the entity's power. The spell in the book was meant to bind a soul to the cat, cursed to live out the rest of its life serving the entity. I looked up from the book, my heart pounding. Marmalade was standing at the basement door, watching me with those cold, unblinking eyes. I couldn't understand why I hadn't seen it before, but now it was clear. He had been changed, marked by the curse. He had been the one chosen to serve the dark god of the woods. And now, the curse was affecting him in ways I didn't fully understand. His presence alone brought a suffocating sense of dread into the air, as though the walls themselves were closing in on me. I tried to leave, but every time I moved, Marmalade would follow, his eyes never leaving me. I couldn't escape him. I couldn't escape the feeling that the curse was slowly spreading, not just through Marmalade, but through me as well. The worst part? I don't think I was the one who found the book. I don't think I was the one who read the spell. I think it was Marmalade. Somehow, through the curse, he had led me to it, as if this was all part of the plan. The plan to draw me into the darkness that had consumed him. That night, I made a decision. I went into the woods, led by Marmalade, his cold eyes guiding me like a beacon. The whispers had grown louder, filling my head, pressing against my skull like they were trying to break through. The trees were alive with movement, and I felt as if something was just out of sight, watching, waiting. When we reached the clearing, the ground seemed to pulse beneath my feet. And there, in the center, was a stone circle, a ritual site from the old days. Marmalade sat at the center, his eyes glowing fiercely. He meowed once, loud, sharp, as though calling to something in the depths of the earth. I knew, then, it was too late. The curse wasn't just on him. It was on both of us now. If you ever find yourself in Hollow's End, and you see an orange tabby with cold, gray eyes, don't be fooled by his familiar look. Don't follow him, don't call to him. There's something wrong with that cat, something old, something dark. I don't know if he was always like that, or if it was the curse that changed him. But what I do know is that he's no longer just a cat. He's bound to something far more powerful than you could ever imagine. I was lucky. I made it out. I don't know how, but I did. I'm not sure if it's my own willpower, or maybe it was the mercy of God, but somehow I broke free from the grip of whatever forces were controlling Marmalade. The curse, the whispers, the entity, it all tried to pull me into its world. But I ran. I ran until my legs gave out, until the air was thick with the fog and I thought I'd be swallowed up by it. The moment I stepped out of the woods and saw the faint lights of Hollow's End in the distance, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Maybe it was just the relief of surviving, of getting away from the madness that had taken over my life. Maybe it was something more. I don't know what happened to Marmalade after that. I don't want to know. I know that what he's become is something beyond my understanding, something not meant for this world. But I'm free. And for that, I thank God every day. So, if you're ever passing through this cursed town, if you see that orange tabby with eyes that are anything but warm, don't make the same mistake I did. Keep your distance. Keep your faith. And remember, some things are better left unexplored. Because not every mystery should be solved. Some doors are meant to stay closed. And if you get lucky, if you get out alive, you might just be able to forget the strange events that happened here. But I can never forget. I'll carry that darkness with me for the rest of my life. Our last story of today's episode called The Claws of Jealousy by Daniel from Colorado. My name is Daniel, and I'm from Cedar Ridge, Colorado. Cedar Ridge is a small, isolated mountain town nestled among towering pine trees. The air is always crisp, filled with the earthy scent of wood and leaves. It's the kind of place where people mind their business and everything moves at a quiet, deliberate pace. I moved here 3 years ago to escape the noise of the city, to find some peace in the mountains, and for the most part, it's been everything I hoped for. My only companion is Luna, a sleek black and white tuxedo cat I adopted from the local shelter shortly after I arrived. She's been with me ever since. Luna was always a bit of a peculiar cat. She had her quirks. She'd follow me from room to room, sit at my feet while I worked, and curl up on my lap whenever I sat down. But there was something unsettling about her. Something in the way her green eyes would watch me with an intensity that felt too aware. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the usual eccentricities of cats. But over time, I realized Luna wasn't just a bit possessive, she was territorial in a way that went beyond normal pet behavior. Things started to change when I began dating. It started with Emily. We met at the local coffee shop one morning, and we clicked immediately. She was funny, smart, and had this vibrant energy that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I invited her over for dinner on October 10th, 2023. It seemed like a simple, harmless thing, but that's when I first noticed how Luna reacted. Luna didn't hiss, growl, or even make a sound. She just stared. From the moment Emily entered the house, Luna sat on the arm of the couch and fixed her gaze on her, green eyes sharp and unwavering. Emily tried to pet her, but Luna didn't soften. She didn't purr. She just watched, her tail twitching at a slow, deliberate pace. At first, Emily thought it was cute. "She's just protective of you," she said, laughing nervously as she reached out again. But Luna didn't respond. She didn't even blink. That night, after Emily left, Luna didn't leave me alone. She followed me from room to room, meowing insistently. I sat down on the couch, trying to relax, but Luna jumped onto my lap, sinking her claws deep into my legs. I yelped in pain and pushed her off, but she didn't move. She just sat there, staring at me with those piercing eyes. The next few days were worse. Every time I had a date, Luna would act out. She'd knock over plants, scratch the furniture, even pee on my bed. But the worst part wasn't just her behavior, it was how she treated the women I brought home. If any of them tried to get close to her, Luna would hiss, her fur would stand on end, and she would swipe at them with a viciousness that made me feel uneasy. One woman, Sarah, ended up with a deep scratch on her hand that became infected. She didn't come back after that. I tried everything to calm her down, new toys, extra treats, even a pheromone diffuser. But nothing worked. It was like she was intentionally sabotaging any chance I had at a relationship. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't bear the thought of losing any more chances. And then came Rachel. Rachel was different. She was patient with Luna, understanding, and even willing to let Luna warm up to her. We'd been seeing each other for a few weeks, and things seemed to be going well. But when Rachel came over on November 1st, Luna snapped. I was in the kitchen, setting the table, when I heard Rachel scream. I rushed into the living room to find Luna perched on Rachel's shoulder, her claws buried deep in Rachel's skin. Rachel was crying, trying to shake Luna off, but Luna wouldn't let go. Her eyes were wild, and she growled, a low, rumbling sound that didn't sound like a cat at all. I pulled Luna off of Rachel, but she didn't stop. She just stared at Rachel, her tail lashing furiously. Rachel left in tears, and I knew then that things were beyond repair. I collapsed onto the couch, my hands bleeding from Luna's claws. That's when Luna jumped onto the windowsill across the room, her green eyes never leaving me. She sat there silently, her posture rigid, as if she was waiting for me to understand something. And that's when I realized she didn't need to speak for me to understand. Her eyes, her actions, they were telling me everything. She wasn't just upset. She was angry. She didn't want anyone else in my life. She didn't want anyone else taking my attention away from her. I don't know how I knew, but I understood that she saw these women as threats to her place in my life. She wasn't just acting out of jealousy. There was something darker in her eyes, something that told me she wouldn't stop until she had me all to herself. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was overthinking it. But things only got worse. Luna began to act even more erratic. She would disappear for hours at a time, only to show up in strange places, inside closed cabinets, on top of the refrigerator, or hidden in the attic. And her eyes, they began to glow faintly in the dark. Not literally glowing, but it was as if the green had taken on an unnatural brightness. It made my skin crawl. Then, on November 7th, I came home to something that shook me to my core. Luna was sitting on the kitchen counter, her fur matted with something dark and sticky. On the floor below her was a dead bird, its neck twisted in an unnatural angle. And written on the wall, in what I could only assume was blood, were the words, "You're mine." I froze, my heart racing. The bird, the blood on the wall, the words, they were a message, a sign of something twisted and malicious. I didn't know what Luna had become, but it wasn't just a cat anymore. There was something inside her, something darker that I couldn't comprehend. And it wanted control. Since then, I've kept to myself. I don't bring anyone home anymore. I can't. Every time I think about it, I hear Luna's voice in my head, not in words, but in her actions, her demands. Her eyes still watch me, always waiting, always reminding me that she sees everything, controls everything. The whispers are gone now, but I can feel her presence, lurking just beyond the edge of my thoughts, always watching, always waiting. I don't know what Luna is anymore. I don't know if she's still just my cat, or if something darker has taken hold of her. But I've learned to understand her, and that's what terrifies me the most. She doesn't need to speak to get her message across. I can hear it loud and clear. I've learned my lesson, and it's one I can never forget. After everything that happened with Luna, I'm never adopting another cat again. The constant watching, the feeling that I was never truly alone, it changed me. There's something about the way animals can get into your mind, their presence always lingering, always making you second-guess your own thoughts and actions. I can't explain how, but Luna's influence, it broke something in me. I used to love the quiet, the peacefulness of Cedar Ridge. But now, every time I hear a soft meow in the distance, or catch the glint of green eyes in the dark, a shiver runs down my spine. It's as if Luna is still here, watching me, even though I've moved far away from that place. I can't look at another cat without feeling that cold weight settle in my chest. I don't trust them anymore. I don't trust their eyes, or the way they watch you without ever blinking. It's as if they know something you don't, something dangerous. So, if you're ever in Cedar Ridge, Colorado, and you see a sleek black and white tuxedo cat with glowing green eyes, don't even think about getting close. If you hear her meowing softly in the night, turn around and leave. There's something about cats, something about Luna, that I can never unsee. Once they've got their claws in you, it's too late. You won't even know what's real anymore. I didn't just lose my relationship with Rachel or the women I dated. I lost myself. That's the price I paid for bringing a cat into my life. And I'll never make that mistake again.